October 879. They had travelled back to Doia, the slow, steady stream of carts which had left 4 months before, taking the dead king to his resting place at Ardmarka. The light-hearted, happy Muir to her new life married to the king of Tara, and the Pali of the clans, of the children of the UNA tilde copyright ill, for trade, for fun, for justice, for renewal. It was autumn. Harvests had been gathered, food plentiful. Mornings began mild, with mists rising from the fields. All Saints' Day, where every saint in Irian would be remembered in a service at the monastery, as it had been a year ago, was nearly upon them, and, the day before, dinner would be eaten in silence, apples would be shared and little trinkets laid about the land to mark Samhain, the liminal line again between Christianity and heathenism. There was renewal. Osrith had thought, riding on the covered cart, Malcolm asleep next to her Neil Glundu begging for another story, of the princess in the castle by the sea. She would never tell that one again, Osrith told herself, as she led the 3 girls and 2 young boys over the monastery. The boy remembered it too well. Instead, she stuck to the stories of Kings Solomon and David, of goodness and hope, of might and wisdom. On their return, the mood of the procession was solemn. They did not stop at Kells, nor Ermadka, instead, covered as much ground as possible. Flann was concerned about this, the northern UNA tilde copyright ill territory, and that of the Airgila sign A tilde inverted exclamation mark. Elmac king of the Ulaid would not rest from the challenge to take the land he thought rightfully his. His departure from Tara was merely a retreat, not a submission. The Ulaid would never accept UNA tilde copyright ill king as their high king, and it was suspected that he would mount an attack, and soon. No, Osrith did not know the suspicions of the king. Tadg told her, one night as they were resting in the stables of a monastery just outside Stredbane, that this was his fear, which is why they were running, fast, for the fortress at Doia, to establish Flann's kingship in the north. Osrith found it was difficult without Finolai. Strange, they could all feel it when they were riding. No one was there to respond to Tadg's suppositions that the spirits had made the day fine for them, or the water nymphs the rain. Neither she nor Tadg had Finolai's patience practicing swordsmanship with Fergus, ferocious, stolid, but with few tactics, and both spat frustrated words at him. Osrith missed him dreadfully. He had grown to be her friend. He had helped her with her hair, her clothes, her battle skills. Sat with her when she wearied ahead of the other warriors. He never demanded anything of her, not her time or her body, and Finolai's goodness left behind a gnawing hole in Osrith's soul, balmed only with the knowledge that she had done what she could for him. He had silver. He would find a way to stay alive, well away, Osrith hoped, from the Gaelish royal family who had plotted to enslave him like they had a fierce, inconvenient young queen that morning on the beach near Tara. It had struck particularly hard on the morning they had left Stredbane, just south of the River Foyle, before they headed down river to Doia. Osrith had asked Tadg to battle her, and he murmured that he was a poor replacement, meaning to Finolai, his verbal sparring partner. Did they know where he was? That Domhnall was involved. Should she tell them she helped him escape? But, in truth, both warriors had turned in on themselves. As Osrith watched Tadg's white blonde hair spilled from under his helmet, and Fergus's fire-kissed head absorbing the afternoon sun's deep gold, she felt the weight of guilt on her stomach. She was with them, yet Finolai was not. They had followed the Foyle along the valley as fast as the horses could take the retinue, laden with canvases, cooking pots, wood poles and chests. Osrith had looked on, towards Loch Foyle. It was nearly 2 moons the Heathenbeatha said to meet her then. But, when Osrith had slipped away to meet the heathens, she hadn't been there. For a week Osrith walked the 5 miles to the sandy beach in the mornings, and each time there was no sign. Not that she had the silver to pay any longer, but she had a sword, of sorts, and her ability to fight. So she had gone back to the palace, increasingly annoyed at their arrangement being broken, avoiding Domhnall MacFinlaith, who had taken it upon himself to watch her walk, nothing more. Just watch her pass the monastery and walk up towards the stables to sit with Tadg and Fergus. his pale grey eyes resting on her until Osrith turned her head and looked at him. There want to be king of Doir and all of the northern copyright hill territory. And it struck her, the second night, how frustrated he must be to lose his birthright, to be passed over at Team Reach, at the vote of High King and marriage to Malmuir, to Flan Sinner. The young man, who had spent a good deal of his time up to his neck in drink and up to his groin in serving girls, his sister gone, must be very bitter indeed. Osrith's first duty when they arrived back at the northern copyright hills palace at Doir was to aid with the feast. Stirred by months of inactivity, like patting a chair heavily laden with dust, the maids, servants, kitchen boys, stable hands and housekeepers sprang into action. Osrith had been taken to the kitchens on the night they had arrived back and had worked into the night as the cook, harried with the journey, barked orders at her with words she could not understand. The other servant girls did, however, and they scuttled about, carrying barrels, bringing chickens, plucking and degizzarding them, bringing ale. As usual, they ignored Osrith, instead, pointing to her hair as she passed. It was growing back, thick and stubbily, and now, 3 days after arriving back, she was standing outside Malmuir's chambers, answering her summons. Dressed in a dark woolen dress, knitted shawl around her shoulders, King Flan's wife beckoned her in. It was colder now, much darker than the last time she had been there, to receive instruction about educating Theg children, and had seen the gospel book, to be embellished by the squid ink from the sea beasts she was to find. Queen Muir was not happy with Osrith and said so. She began with the dress she had been given, which lay in shreds in the hedgerow about Dara. Then, to her battle with Domhnall's man, whom she had killed, finishing with her refusal to marry. Osrith listened, keenly and intently, as the queen looked her over, insisting she see her wounds, then insisting on Ronaid, her maid, bathe them. They were not as bad as they could have been. Ronaid pointed out new skin forming on her shoulder and neck, and all at once, Osrith was reminded of her good friend Finolai, who knew how to treat her injuries and had quietly and gently soothed her mind, and was overcome with a shiver of guilt. He had to run. For the copyright hills, a girl, Domhnall's sister, once queen to Flan, had been enslaved. Did Muir know this? She was to continue teaching the children. Muir relayed. Osrith's skill was valued, for both the princesses and the young princes, and she should spend time in the monastery learning more. And to serve. Her bed was to be at the back of the kitchens so she could more easily work for Moray, the ill-tempered cook. Before she left, Ronaid shaped her hair, bringing a thin blade that reflected the sun's mellow light onto its steel to Osrith's head. Muir watched, but said nothing. Was she waiting for Osrith to say something about her treatment that night, by Domhnall and Donchada? Muir was about to dismiss her, when the look on Osrith's face instead caused the queen to call her to her. "What troubles you?" she asked, kindness in her voice. "My body," Osrith blurted out. She had not meant to say anything, but her shape had been concerning her. "It has changed. It is different to once it was." The will had gone out of her fight, too. But this was nothing a queen could help her with. Muir looked earnestly at her, as Osrith felt her face redden with her confession, and the queen laughed. "You are becoming a woman, Osrith," she tinkled. "You are 16 now." 14, Osrith corrected, annoyed that these changes were because she was growing into femininity. Would it stop her from fighting? Domhnall had told her to eschew sex, lest she became with child, yet if her body was going to change anyway, and she could not continue to be a warrior, was there any point? "You could marry," Muir suggested, still smiling at Osrith. "We have warriors to whom you could be wed, and be safe. Domhnall has spoken to me that Tadgor Fergus may be suitable, or one of our own. You speak Gaelish well." "Marry?" Osrith scoffed, touching across to her shoulder. "I will never marry," she declared, feeling the void which was Finolai in her heart. He was the closest she would ever come to marriage, and his predilection for men would prevent anything, perfect to prevent children. Where was he? Osrith sent up a silent prayer that he was well, and not recaptured. And then, as she stood before the queen, who had taken Osrith's declaration solemnly, she resolved to never give in to passion again, to remember she was seeking her brother, Uhtred, and yes, she would. She should fight the changes in her body and continue to be a warrior despite tiredness, lethargy, effort of will to fight. Despite Muir's reassurances, Osrith still knew there was something not right with her body. She put her hand to her hair. "It will grow, and you will be no beautiful again," said Muir, misunderstanding Osrith's decision to deny herself marriage. She nodded dumbly to the queen, who dismissed her. Yes, it would grow, and with it, so must she. She must leave this land. But, did it need to? Saxon men sheared their hair short, as did criminals within Gaelish society. She had lost her hair for her mistake. As long as it was short she would not forget it. Instead, her shorn head would help her when she bidded to travel to Wessex, to Father Booker, to Winchester, and to her brother. 88,888,888. As usual, Osrith was already up the next morning before dawn, carrying and fetching in the palace kitchens, water, vegetables, deceased chickens. Her tasks had increased since she was last in that cold, stuffy place, the meager fire doing little to raise the temperature, as several of the jobs the servant girl, who looked ready to give birth any day, had fallen Osrith's way, and the servants purchased at Tara were slow and reluctant, still at the beat them to break them stage. Osrith stared through the open courtyard door at the wretches, many from over the water, from Cumbraland, her mother's kingdom, and southern Northumbria, by the coast opposite the coast of Irion. Osrith had seen a map in the monastery showing all of the kingdoms of both isles. A young monk, Andra, who opened the monastery to the little scholarly party each morning, pointed them put to her one night when she had returned claiming to be preparing her lessons, but instead was seeking more information about Uhtred. He had shown her Alba and Mercia, Wessex in the south, and East Anglia, Wallis and Cornwall. On the smaller isle the UNA copyright territories were picked out large and bold, marking their importance. But Osrith's eye had caught a tiny fortress on England's east coast, marked Bibbenberg, close to Pitland far from Wessex. Now, as the sun stretched its rays over the stony courtyard that morning, Osrith wondered whether they had all come from England. Christians were not supposed to enslave Christians, yet half a dozen were young men with strength in their arms, who whipped their chains and begged in vain for God to grant their freedom. Poor men, Osrith thought, as the guards beat the men with sticks until they cowered away towards the damp, mulchy earth. Poor men traded for gold, men like Finolai, who may have wronged someone more powerful than them, or had just gone voluntarily to prevent their families from starving to death. Not all of them were from the British Isles, though. 2 other men were dark-skinned, clearly purchased by the Danish slaver from a land overseas. They were more willing than the other men to work, and worked faster than the Irish servant girls, who clearly resented their efficiency, hurling terrible insults to the 2 men about the tortures they wished on them in hell as they went by, though not being understood at all. 1 or 2 of the slave women looked up. The ones Osrith suspected were of Cumbraland, for Cymric was similar to Gaelish, and they cowered behind the buckets of well water, hoping that the servants did not curse them to hell next. Osrith empathized with the dark-skinned girls, their black hair standing proud of their heads against the pale blue autumn sky, wishing she could offer her sympathy. But neither spoke Gaelish, Anglish, Saxon or Cymric. The slave keepers had tried those languages out on them the day before. They did understand the stick and the leather horselash however, though neither of the 2 had done anything to deserve a beating, but they got one anyway, to show them their place. Osrith had decided to give them bowls of gruel a little fuller than those of the Irish servants and, that morning, smiled at them as they beat the laundry with stones and stood between them as 2 stable hands tried to back them into the storehouse, the handle of Tadg's short sword in her grip, ready to pull it. It was they who found Osrith that morning, when the Irish servant began to groan, a thin liquid, dark and bloody, running down her leg, shouting what sounded like instructions to Osrith. Pointing and grasping her tunic, Osrith realized that the girl's baby was to make an appearance, and soon. As she turned to look for help, Osrith realized she was the help for which the pregnant girl's eyes were searching, and a sudden feeling of panic flashed through Osrith and she grasped for the thick, ill-fitting planks that bordered over ancient posts, nausea following soon after. She felt a hand on her shoulder and looked down. It was the other servant girl pulling at her jerkin, trying to get her attention, speaking Irish so fast that Osrith could not make out the words. Terror was etched into her brow. There was something wrong, something very wrong with the birth, and both Irish girls knew it. Osrith approached the girl, looking at her face, her hands, and down to her legs. It was clear both girls expected her to do something. She did. She reeled, acid sickness catching in her throat as the girl cradled her hands between her legs, more blood seeping out onto them. "Come," Osrith encouraged, beckoning both girls down back to their beds. But both of them stopped still, the other girl gabbling something which sounded beseeching, panicky. Maybe she could stay in the hall and get someone else to help. Osrith knew little of birth, and she paced away from the servants, to a howl of dismay as the pregnant girl buckled over towards the whitewashed wall of the back kitchen, her friend shouting back to Osrith as she supported her. Before Osrith she had a chance to find anyone, however, a knock at the kitchen's oak door drew her attention. As she opened it, it was none other than the Princess Mary, giving her a solemn, doubtful look. "You are to take us to the monastery now?" the girl demanded, folding her arms. Beyond the gate, in the quadrangle of the palace gardens, the Ocha children stood. "Aunt Muir commands it," and a scream broke her sentence. Startled, Mary looked past Osrith and up along the stone-floored passage. "It's the servant girl," Osrith explained, looking towards the scream, low and long as it was, like a cow in pain. "You are helping," Mary concluded, stepping back through the door, trying to close it behind her. But Osrith gripped onto the iron ring of the latch, holding the door firmly, her knuckles going white. Mary looked up into Osrith's face. "You are going to help," she declared, as vomit regurgitated into Osrith's throat. "And do what?" Osrith managed, gagging on the sour backwash in her mouth. "You would have been drowned the day you were born," her uncle Alfred had often told her bitterly, usually when he had given a good proportion of his wealth in tribute. So Osrith had ensured she had behaved as much like a boy as she could, and avoided learning womanly skills, including childbirth. Mary looked between Osrith's hand, still gripping the door frame, and her face. Another scream, low and cold, made Osrith shudder. Mary beckoned terrified servant girl who had followed Osrith. Beside her, Ayla, the Irish servant, babbled something again. "Go," Mary commanded, in Gaelish to the girl, then turned her haughty face to Osrith. "You will know what to do, go with her." And, before waiting for an answer, the princess strode off in the direction of the kitchen. Ailey, the pregnant servant, was still moaning, though not so loudly. Her face was pale, shimmering with perspiration. Osrith went to console her, to help her, but the girl's body felt too fragile, as if the next sigh would be her last. "Lie her down," she suggested, but Ayla pushed her away. "She must stand," the servant girl said, then pointed towards the back rooms, where they slept. Osrith bent to curl Ayla's arm around her neck, to get her to the back rooms, but she shuddered, then screamed. Ayla shouted at Osrith to stop. "No!" Mary's voice rang out down the stone passageway. Osrith turned to see the Limerick princess hurrying after them, pointing. "No!" Blackwater, Blackwater!" Osrith echoed, looking around. Ayla, who was holding Ailey's other arm, screamed, pointing behind the now weakening girl. "The baby is in danger." Mary shot back, dropping the bundle of blankets she was carrying. "Stand her up, as tall as you can make her." "And then what?" "What? Indeed." The morning passed, whether it was hours or minutes, Osrith could not say. Ailey howled as Osrith drew her upright, walking her to the rooms in which they slept, Ayla comforting her. "The babe that grows within her takes her strength," Mary told Osrith, who narrowed her eyes as the girl thrust a bucket of hot water into Osrith's hand, demanding the kitchen maid bring them more. "You know a lot about this," Osrith commented, as Mary instructed Ayla to take her clothes, then position Ailey so she could help birth the child. Through a tangle of blood, Blackwater, clear fluid. My sister is married to the king in Munster. I am here for my education, but before I came, I helped my sister. Mary smiled, and Osrith realized the smile was intended to reassure her. After that, the time passed indeterminately, as Mary took charge, comforting and encouraging the girl on turn as she labored painfully to produce, in the end, a small but healthy boy. Osrith stood back as Mary instructed Ayla on how to help Ailey with her son, just one thought in her mind, to find the heathen, Betha, and beg her to show her ways of getting rid of it. Now get water, Osrith heard a tired, fluid-covered Mary tell the kitchen maid. She needs rest and to drink. Osrith stumbled past them, nausea in her throat, darting as she was for the door to the courtyard and into the open air. She stood by the hay cart that one of the slaves was unloading, inhaling the fresh harvest scent deeply. After a few moments, she was aware that an hour clean, spotless Mary was approaching her. Osrith turned her head, smiling at the girl. The sun shone high and warm in the summer sky as Mary began to speak to her, but she turned and vomited. All that blood was all Osrith could manage, and she felt the girl's smile light on her face. You have been in battles, Mary replied, astonishment in her voice. You have known such horrors. Osrith looked at the princess, who had conducted herself with such grace as she comforted and soothed the servant girl. Battle? Yes, Osrith scoffed, holding her stomach and vomiting again. Battle is easy. You stab, cut, kill, and the ground fills with the filth of spilled guts and the mounds of metallic-smelling bodies of men. Now meet. But birth. Osrith broke off, looking past Mary to the back kitchen rooms where a soft crying was coming. It is delicate, it is cautious. How did you know what to do? My sister, Queen in Munster, she has had many children, not all of them living. I learned to help her. Osrith turned and vomited again. Mary laughed gently, not mockingly, and Osrith laughed too. The younger girl placed an arm on her shoulder, tenderly. Perhaps there is a place for all of us, to be a warrior, like you, to be a midwife, like me. We will both become mothers, in the end. Not I. I will never marry, Osrith declared. Do you think she is married? I will never bear a child, Osrith corrected. No child will grow in me. I could never warrior if I became with child. Mary patted her shoulder, which twinged a little still from her fight in Tara. I think you will be a mother, Mary said, as Osrith heaved again onto the earth. Would you like to see the baby? A warm summer wind wove around them, as Osrith watched Mary walk towards the kitchen doors. No, a thought told her, but she followed the princess anyway. Haughty Mary, who had probably saved 2 lives that morning. Ailey was producing the afterbirth as Osrith made her way through the oak doors, which caused her to pale again. Mary thrust her wooden bowl of now cooled boiled water towards her, which Osrith drank down gratefully. A few words between Ayla and herself, which Osrith couldn't quite grasp, though sounded like instructions and reassurances. Then Mary told Osrith she was to change. When Aunt Muir asks if this, you must tell her you did this. Mary sighed, exhausted with the effort of the morning. But it is unseemly that I would have intervened. Ayla will wash my clothes. She will tell it was you, not me. But then Osrith stopped protesting. It was clear Mary had breached royal and social boundaries by birthing bastard child that morning. It was also clear that the haughty, imperious princess felt it was safe to confide in her. Osrith, female warrior, daily reminder to everyone that she was damned for it. Osrith watched Mary head towards the royal quarters, and she turned, in the warm sun, making her way towards the monastery. The children had been taken across by Gormleth and, when Osrith arrived, had been busy on their letters. For the younger boys, Gormleth, noticeably thinner than Osrith remembered from her time at the Tara Fair, stood reading the Gospels, her heart-shaped face lined and colorless. She smiled her delicate smile as Osrith entered the tiled library, though Osrith discerned its bow seemed weighed by a heavy force. Mary joined them shortly afterwards, and Osrith's mind turned from Gormleth as that morning's midwife, resuming her proud, lordly demeanor as if that morning never had been. Once or twice, Osrith glanced at the girl as she looked up from her work, twinkling her pale blue eyes at Osrith. The rest of the day passed uneventfully before she organized the little party to cross back to the palace. Leaving them at the door to Muir's chamber, mind filled with thoughts of the monastery, and particularly a fresh batch of letters which had arrived that morning, Osrith was surprised when, as the door opened to let in the royal children, it remained open and she was summoned in. "I'm hardly dressed for an audience with the Queen," she thought, as she trod her muddy boots onto the delicately woven carpet, yet it was Queen Muir who had summoned her and, with the children at her side, asked her about the events of the morning, congratulating her. "Yet, you neglected your duties," Muir rebuked, harshly. The children were left unprotected for nearly 3 hours. They had to find their way to their monastery themselves. "Mary has missed her studies, for you did not know where she was." Osrith stopped herself from looking at the girl, but she could feel her eyes on her, begging Osrith to hold her peace. I could not see the girl suffer. The child was in danger. "We are all God's creatures and my instinct was to help one of them to live." Then, she bowed her head, hoping she sounded penitent. "I should have guarded the children, Your Grace, only I thought the other servant girl could handle the birth." Yet, Ailey produced black waters, and, a look of horror passed over Muir's face for a moment, betraying to Osrith that the Queen knew the gravity of such an event, even though she, Osrith, didn't. But, she would never forget the look on Ailey's face, the look men gave her at the point of death on a battlefield. She never wanted to put herself into that much danger, and resolved again to find Bethu and Finn, to procure from them herbs and roots to prevent a child, even permanently, if only she could find them again. "I will overlook it," Muir said, interrupting Osrith's thoughts, "but this evening, Mary will make up her studies with you before your meeting with Domhnall." That was news to Osrith, and she said so, the thought of an evening searching for her brother and Bicker in the monastery's recent correspondence evaporating like morning dew. "My son told me," Muir said, then raised her hand, dismissing Osrith. With Mary at her side. Domhnall. Why was he privy to a meeting with Domhnall? Osrith thought about this as they trod the dry earth between the back of the palace again and the street. Combesil's monastery, Mary walking silently next to her. And she was still wondering that when she dismissed the now more educated Mary back to the palace before crossing over the short grass to the stables. The warmth of the animals was oppressive on that balmy night, and Osrith found Tagged and Fergus up on the stable roof. With them was the heir to the northern UNA tilde copyright ill, who stared at Osrith as she sat down next to Tagged, who offered her the rest of his apple. She bit into it, listening as Tagged and Fergus discussed why it might be that Domhnall wished to see them, her heart sinking at the realization that one of them was missing, Finn O'Ly. She had been expecting to see their warrior sitting with them, stretched out next to Tagged as he ribbed the blonde-haired warrior about his belief in the Scythe, or sipping ale from a tankard as Fergus regaled them with a far-fetched story about a battle in the Highlands against the Atildilpin family's biggest rivals, now firmest friends, the Graias. Her eyes rested on Domhnall again as Tagged passed her ale. What was he doing here? Why was he at Domhnall's meeting? She knew she would be subject to a beating, otherwise she would have leapt on the prince and beat him, for what he had done to her at Tara, and what he had done 2 days before, laughing as he fouled the passage she had spent the morning cleaning, with horse shit, causing her to have to re-clean the whole lot. Sensing tension, Tagged moved nearer to her, congratulating her on birthing the servant's child so well that morning. Osrith nodded, dismissively. It had been Mary, of us, and she felt as if she should congratulate Constantine, who had settled down next to her on the sun-warmed clay tiles, on his betrothal to such a sensible girl. "My son told me," Muir said, then raised her hand, dismissing Osrith, with Mary at her side. Domhnall. Why was he privy to a meeting with Domhnall? Osrith thought about this as they trod the dry earth between the back of the palace again and the street. Combesil's monastery, Mary walking silently next to her. And she was still wondering that when she dismissed the now more educated Mary back to the palace before crossing over the short grass to the stables. The warmth of the animals was oppressive on that balmy night, and Osrith found Tagged and Fergus up on the stable roof. With them was the heir to the northern UNA tilde copyright ill, who stared at Osrith as she sat down next to Tagged, who offered her the rest of his apple. She bit into it, listening as Tagged and Fergus discussed why it might be that Domhnall wished to see them, her heart sinking at the realization that one of them was missing, Finoli. She had been expecting to see their warrior sitting with them, stretched out next to Tagged as he ribbed the blonde-haired warrior about his belief in the Scythe, or sipping ale from a tankard as Fergus regaled them with a far-fetched story about a battle in the Highlands against the Atildelpin family's biggest rivals, now firmest friends, the Graias. Her eyes rested on Domhnall again as Tagged passed her ale. What was he doing here? Why was he at Domhnall's meeting? She knew she would be subject to a beating, otherwise she would have leapt on the prince and beat him, for what he had done to her at Tara, and what he had done 2 days before, laughing as he fouled the passage she had spent the morning cleaning, with horse shit. Sensing tension, Tagged moved nearer to her, congratulating her on birthing the servant's child so well that morning. Osrith nodded, dismissively. It had been Mary, of course, and she felt as if she should congratulate Constantine, who had settled down next to her on the sun-warmed clay tiles, on his betrothal to such a sensible girl.